In this episode of Children of Heroes, we travelled over 7 hours north from London to Edinburgh in Scotland, where we talked to Mr. Earl Laks, son of Sergeant Jindřich Laks.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father served in the Czechoslovak army in the United Kingdom during the Second World War. He escaped from Czechoslovakia in 1939.
Yes.
What route did he take?
We don't clearly understand how he did it, but he went from Czechoslovakia into France as part of the Czech freedom fighters. Mm-hmm. And in France, they were all enlisted voluntarily or otherwise into the French Foreign Legion. Mm-hmm. And he was in France for a few months, at which point things had not gone well for the Allies, and he had to evacuate along with some 4,000 other Czech soldiers via Dunkirk and wherever into the UK.
In the UK, he joined the Free Czechoslovak Army?
It was, I guess, in transition from, he left France as part of the French Foreign Legion, showed up in England. He's now part of the Czechoslovakian Free Army and was stationed at a place called Cholmondeley Castle, just outside of Manchester, and that was in 1940, along with several thousand other soldiers basically on the run.
And what exactly was his role in the Free Czechoslovak Army?
He was in the infantry. He was part of a tank corps, your basic soldier. And, he started off as a private and moved up through the ranks. He went to corporal, to sergeant. He was promoted several times. And one of the things that my father left behind is a photograph album from the war. These are just, he never talked to us too much about these pictures.
Is it from Cholmondeley Castle?
This is all from Cholmondeley Castle, of the unit that he was with, and just kind of life in the, stationed at the castle. This is the unit that he was stationed with. And this is one of my favorite photos. I would love to know who this person is. My father, when he left Czechoslovakia, he left with 3 friends. So these 4 guys went roaming around, ended up in France, ended up in the service. I'm sure this is one of his good friends. That's also my father. You can just barely see his face, leaning on a shovel, which seems appropriate. When my father met my mother, he only spoke a few words of English at best. My mother spoke only English. My father had made it from Cholmondeley Castle up to Manchester on a Friday evening, and he went to a synagogue service. And at that service, there was a couple of women there, one of which was my mother's sister-in-law. And they had this habit, because their father was a rabbi, of bringing home soldiers that had no place else to go. They'd bring them home for Sabbath dinner. So they invited my father home to Sabbath dinner. And he was very shy, my mother was very shy, but, my aunt kind of pushed them together, and one thing leads to another. I asked my mother, I said, how did you and Daddy get married when you didn't share a common language? The common language was Yiddish. My father spoke Yiddish, my grandfather, my mother's father spoke Yiddish, and he would just translate for her. My mother's answer was, I have to say, very cute. She says, well, love finds a way. And she had a cute little grin on her face. So Dad got married in his uniform. They gave him permission to take the day off and go and get married.
After D-Day, he landed in France. What happened then?
If I remember, he told me about 10 days, 12 days after the initial D-Day, he was sent into France. And his job was just roam the countryside to try and find the last pockets of German resistance. I remember him telling me a few stories about his time there. They were low on rations. The supply chain apparently wasn't that good. And so anything they could do, stop at the nearest farm, any food they could scrounge up, they would. And he was telling me this story that he seemed rather proud of, that they found this one French farm where the farmhouse had a flooded basement, and they had suspicions that there was a wine cellar in there. So they sent him in with a stick to poke around around him until he heard something that sounded like some bottles, and then he went diving and came out with a bunch of wine, which soldier's best friend, I guess, relieves some of the stress.
Did he talk about his memories from the war?
Very, very little. His mother died in a concentration camp, and if he ever talked about the war or started to remember his mother, he'd get rather emotional about it, and he just stopped talking about it. We understood as a family that, all right, it's going to upset him. And one of the things I was doing, at the time, he was living in Connecticut near the end of his life, and I was living on Long Island, and I actually went and bought a map of, at the time, Czechoslovakia, and I wanted to sit with him and draw on the map all the places he had been, because he talked about the Carpathian Mountains, he talked about Prague, he talked about all these places. I started to draw on the map, and then some odd thing or other happened, and I had to leave early that day, and I said, all right, Dad, I'll be back. And sadly, a week later, he passed away. And I never got to finish the map of what his travels were. But it was, again, towards the end of his life, he was actually just feeling comfortable enough to talk about it a little bit.
After the war, he returned to Czechoslovakia?
Very briefly. When he returned to Czechoslovakia, at that time the communists were in control, and they basically wanted him to stay and join their army and serve that society. And he decided, no, he's seen enough bad already. He had found out that his mother and his sister had both died in the camps, and he just wanted out of there. So whatever he can carry on his back, he just took, some of which was some family crystal, that we've had for the last 80 years, packed up and left, and found his way eventually back to England and back to his wife in Manchester. He was married at that point.
It was in 1948?
This was 1945, okay. Immediately after when the peace was declared. He managed to find his way back to Czechoslovakia, and he just turned around and made a beeline back to Manchester to be with his wife and daughter, my oldest sister at the time. A year later, maybe in 1946, he got on a boat and made his way to America, where he had his sister and a brother-in-law waiting for him to help him, settle in Connecticut. And a year after that, he sent for my mother, his wife. And it's a bit of a family joke, but we think 9 months to the day my sister was born when she made it to America.
What did he do in the United States?
He found a community of fellow compatriots, Czech citizens, Hungarians, a lot of them being, Jewish citizens as part of a synagogue. He just moved into that community, and one of them owned a factory that made cabinetry. He gave my father a job, and my father spent the next 30-odd years working for this cabinet factory, just provided for the family. He had to feed 5 children and his wife, and he worked. My father was a hard worker. Any bit of overtime he could do, anything he could do to help make life better for the family, he was doing. And as a child, I used to go on a lot of these jobs with him. I learned an awful lot of DIY from my father. I have to say, some of the fond memories.
Did he ever return to Czechoslovakia?
No, he never did. And he never wanted to. And it was just, as I said, a bad memory for him. I guess it was in 1991 when Czech and Slovak, when the division occurred. He had a choice to make. Did he want to be a Czech citizen or a Slovak citizen? And he said, neither. I'm an American. I'm happy. And so he never made a decision. When my brother was working the process to get a citizenship, now this is 1991 that division occurred. Here it is in 2025, as part of the citizenship process, they asked my brother, well, was your father a Czech or a Slovak? And he goes, he's Czech. He's always proud Czech. There was no paperwork to back it up. And he says, well, if we don't have proof that your father was an actual Czech citizen, we're going to have problems getting you your citizenship. Is it okay if we posthumously make him a Czech? And my brother said, yeah, you could do that, no problem. Which in fact they did, and it eased the paperwork. And as a result, him and I both have our citizenship, as well as his 2 daughters, 2 grandchildren, all very proud to honor the heritage.
One of your father's brothers was forced to relocate to the Soviet Union?
Yes, his brother Martin.
What happened?
He was, in effect, caught behind the Iron Curtain. And for many years, my father was trying to figure out ways to try and help him get out, because his oldest son, whose name was Michael, he had just turned 18, and he was due to be drafted into the military. And at that age, going into the military and being Jewish descent in the Russian army would not be a good thing. And they were just worried about that. My father just basically worked with some U.S. senator from the state of Connecticut, and managed to expedite his ability to emigrate to America. So in the 70s, I think, the whole family moved to America. His brother had, during the war, was in a forced labor camp for many years and survived it. However, his wife and his daughter did not. So again, the concentration camps, from just doing research on ancestry, at least 15 of my ancestors disappeared in the camps. You know, there's a lot of things, you know, born this year, died this year. I have a lot of dates that people died in 1944, people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, you know, including my own grandmother. And again, that's one of the reasons why my father just never wanted to go back. It was just too bad of a memory for him.
You were born in the United States to a Czechoslovak father and a British mother. What was your childhood like?
Strangely, my father was the hardworking guy. He was not home a lot. So I had more of a British influence in my upbringing. You know, I felt more British than I did Czech as a child. And over the years, as I've gotten older, that's changed. But I didn't know any different. I was a child of immigrant. Most of the friends I had in school, their parents were immigrants as well. It was just normal. Everybody's parents had accents, Eastern European accents, and it was just the norm. I was born in a city called Bridgeport, Connecticut, and maybe as a young teen, ended up moving to the town next door, Fairfield, Connecticut. And it was your basic suburban town, and life was good growing up in Fairfield. My father would go, he'd be speaking to Hungarian to one person, he'd turn around, speak Czech to the next person, speak English to the third person. That was just normal.
You moved to New York and held technology roles at Citibank. Do you like your job?
I did. I chased an employment opportunity in New York to work for, at the time was a subsidiary of Citibank. It was basically a job involving the newly invented cash machines, ATMs. They were new at that point. This was in 1977. I thought I'd stay there for a few years. I ended up spending almost 40 years working for Citigroup, just moving up the ladder, and ultimately I retired as a senior vice president in technology of Citi, which, long hard work, but I was happy to retire and brought my wife and myself here to the UK. It afforded us that opportunity.
It was in 2019?
2019 is when we moved. In 2008, when the world economy fell apart, especially the financial sector, my wife and I both worked for the same company. We both worked for Citigroup. And we looked at each other on a Friday and said, we may not have jobs on Monday. And that both of our incomes disappearing over the weekend. We had no idea what was going to happen. And amazingly, luckily, we were not laid off. We survived that. But we said, all right, this is just not good. We have to make a long-term plan. I had a whole financial plan figured out to say, all right, we have this house that we built in the Texas Hill Country, and we were going to pay it off before we retire. Well, we were unable to pay it off because of the financial crisis, so we just made a new plan. And we said in 10 years, my wife will retire, we'll sell the house, go debt-free, I will retire, I will get my British citizenship so we can move to the UK, or actually at the time move to Europe, and then Brexit happened.
Then COVID happened.
Well, we actually said we want to live someplace different every 2 years. Every 2 years, we'll just pack up and move and go somewhere. So we started in Brighton, and 2 years turned into almost 4.5 years because of COVID. And then after Brighton, we moved up here to Edinburgh, and we thought we'd be moving for quite a while, but we absolutely fell in love with Edinburgh. And this is now our forever home. We plan on staying here for the rest of our lives. And we're just very happy about that, and we'll just continue to travel through Europe, with our next stop being Prague. I have been a lifelong technologist. It served me well for my whole life, and I just still love to fool with computers and the internet and learning. I am forever trying to learn something new. If a day goes by where I don't learn something, it just feels like a wasted day. But when I learn a fact that I had never known before, my whole head just lights up, and I'm just like, I had not known that.
To what extent would you say your father's life story has influenced you and your life?
He was a traveler. At the age of 23, when things were going very badly in Czechoslovakia, he joined the service, he went to France. From France, he came to England, back to France. And he moved around Europe as just part of being a soldier. And myself and I have a brother living in Israel who's also a traveler. We're all travelers. My family, it was spread out from California, New York, Connecticut, Israel, Edinburgh. We all live apart, the five of us. I kind of attribute that wanderlust of travel to my father. That's just something that we seem to inherited from him.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I'm the youngest of 5 children, and all of our lives have been made better. My father had gone through some tough things through the war and didn't tell us anywhere near some of the things that he had to endure. But he had a goal of at the time, moving to America to make a better life for the family, and in fact, which he did. You know, all of his children, you know, myself included, are just far better off than we would have been otherwise, either in a bombed out England, staying here, or behind the Iron Curtain. So I have to give my father some credit for the vision to make a better life for his family. And he worked hard his whole life to see that happen.